All right. Good morning. Nice. You mind closing that door, Adam? Didn't think of that. So, good morning, everybody. Nice to be with you here on Ask the Agronomist. Nice to have an internet connection that so far looks sound. 10 seconds into the broadcast, maybe I shouldn't say that. Jinx myself. We had some technical difficulties last week, and I'll tell a funny story. One of one of our customers that likes to watch Ask the Agronomist. Not exactly sure why, but he's one of our loyal viewers. Commented that perhaps climate didn't like some of the things that I was going to say last week, and they pulled the plug on the broadcast. I can assure you that is not the case. It was just an internet issue, but hopefully we're good today. We're coming to you live from Nutrients facility south of Macomb, Illinois. So appreciate them for letting us hold their conference room hostage here this morning for an hour on Ask the Agronomist. And as always, please chat in your questions if you got them. I've got a I've got a list today with me of things that I want to talk about, things that I'm proud and excited of, and would like to share with you. However, I would much rather answer your questions. So, if as usual, if you've got questions, you can chat them in. I've got producer Adam back with me here this morning. It's been a while since Adam and I have been together on I think our end of year 21 episode was the last time Adam and I were together. There's been a holiday and some COVID and him being out of the territory, and the COVID was mine, not his, by the way, and and other things that have kept us apart for several weeks here. But nice to be back with him, and I do greatly appreciate the support I get from my FSR teammates to make this happen. So anyway, with that. Once again, welcome, and hope you're all doing well. I want to spend some time here this morning talking about something that I planned to talk about 2 weeks ago on the episode that never happened, and that is the pipeline of products that are coming from Bayer. I don't like to make Ask the Agronomist a Bayer commercial, and that is not the intent here this morning. But I do want to share with you some of the things that are coming over the next decade. And I think all these things are things that I'm excited about. I'm an old Monsanto guy, as most of you know, and so Monsanto was always kind of had a reputation of love them or hate them. We were always an innovative company and always coming up with new and different things. Sometimes people didn't like the way we did things, but you really couldn't help but acknowledge that Monsanto came up with a lot of new products. And so talking about our pipeline and future products that were coming, as an old Monsanto guy, that was something that was kind of just part of our DNA, because there was always new stuff coming, always things to talk about. And I would say a few years leading up to the Bayer integration, we'd kind of gotten out of talking about our pipeline. Frankly, part of that reason was there wasn't as much exciting stuff in it as maybe there had been at one time. I think we got kind of, tired of talking about it because we talked about it so much, and so we just kind of got away from it a little bit. And I'd say over the last year to 2 years, we've recognized that, hey, we don't talk about what's coming in the future as much as we used to. And in addition to that, there's so many things coming in the future. It's really exciting to have the depth of pipeline that we do today. And I would say the Bayer pipeline is deeper than either the old Bayer or the old Monsanto pipeline would have been, because it really covers the whole gamut, from breeding to traits to pesticides, not just herbicides, but fungicides, insecticides, digital. There's just the business touches really every aspect of agriculture, and we've got development things going on in all of those. So I'll just kind of start on a few.
Got a question.
Cool. All right. Good deal. I stumbled around long enough here that we got a question.
We do. Merle Bedell, thanks for the question. Appreciate you chatting in. Merle says some forecasters are forecasting an early warm up this spring.
All right.
What is the earliest you would ever recommend planting 3.6 soybeans in Central Illinois?
Cool. All right. Well, I would say the earliest I'm aware of anybody planting 3-6 soybeans in central Illinois would be middle of February. Not my recommendation, Merle. So don't panic if you're not ready to go to the field yet. It's I think February several years ago there was a guy in East Central Illinois that was kind of a pioneer in early planted soybeans. Planted soybeans February 16th, I recall, was the date. They did survive. They didn't end up being his highest yielding soybeans. He did a large plot. February 16th was first planting date. He had several other planting dates. I believe in that study, some March planted soybeans ended up being his highest yielding beans. But his February 16th planted soybeans that took 58 days, 56 days, almost 60 days to emerge, ended up with about a 2/3 stand, which I'd say is pretty impressive for a February 16th planting date. Made 80, somewhere in the mid 80s, I think. So they were certainly good beans. So and I want one funny story I like to tell for any of you old no-tillers out there like I am. If you're ever around Jim Kinsella in the early days of no-till, Jim did planting date studies in soybeans before that was cool, probably 40 years ago. And the joke that Jim always told, and this is, I would say, modern data would say this is often true as well. The earliest ones that lived were always the best. So he would do planting date studies where he'd plant the first day that was fit, and every week after that was fit, he would plant again. And his joke always was the earliest ones that lived were the best. And that doesn't really help you manage things, right? Because you don't know which ones are going to survive. We have had two, back-to-back years where I have seen soybeans, some of this on my own farm, that were replanted because they were frozen off. And people that don't believe in pushing the envelope on early planted soybeans are quick to point out, well, you better be careful doing that. You're going to get froze off, going to have to replant. And I think if you want to push the window on early planted soybeans, you just need to accept the fact that, 1 year out of 10, maybe, you'll be replanting some soybeans because they get frozen off. So, so there are risks with early planting. Heavier SDS pressure is a risk. Replanting is a risk, although I see plenty of beans get planted in May, they get replanted as well. So I'm not convinced that we necessarily have a higher risk of replant with early planted soybeans, but you do have a higher risk of replanting from freeze with early planted soybeans. So, so to answer your question directly, I would say there's not much data to support in central Illinois planting a mid-group 3 soybean earlier than April 1st is going to give you a yield increase versus an April planting date. Now, that doesn't mean that we haven't had March planted beans that did really well. But, I would say for me personally, if you had really perfect conditions in late March, not saying I wouldn't get started, but, I think early to mid-April is early enough to get the maximum benefit out of early planting. The other thing I would say is it depends a little bit on your soil type and your tillage practices. So I'm I'm an old no-till guy. I think I will always no-till soybeans no matter what. But I would say that the vast majority of research work that I'm familiar with that has been done on early planted soybeans has mostly been done on tilled prairie soils. And a tilled prairie soil that's dark, that's dry, that warms up quicker is a lot different environment than a no-till timber soil, which is what I'm planting my early planted soybeans into. So I do think I'm seeing a little bit of a trend. I haven't researched this. I actually would like to do some planting date studies where tillage is a component of the study to try to answer this question a little bit. But I do see a little bit of a trend out there where almost feels to me like guys that are doing tillage ahead of planting on soybeans are maybe in those early planted soybeans hitting higher yield levels than those of us who are staunch traditional no-tillers. So I do think that your tillage practices could be a factor. I know my colleague Chris Carlisle, he had a soybean planting date study last year where they had a tillage difference, and the difference in early growth between the tilled ground and the no-till ground was just striking. And it's not going to be that way every year, but when we have a cold, tough spring, you're going to get faster vegetative growth in those warmer work soils. And what makes early planted soybeans special is the faster vegetative growth earlier, and the soybean being more developed and developing faster. And if it's not developing faster because the environment is stressful or the soil is cool, I've always said if you planted soybeans April 1st and May 1st, and they flowered on the same day, and they were the same size and the same stage of growth, and the April 1st planted beans were not physiologically ahead of the May 1st planted beans in development, they would yield the same. So the reason that early planted soybeans yield more is because they develop earlier. They're getting more sunlight. They're taking advantage of more sunlight. They're capturing more sunlight. That's because they're bigger. If they're not bigger, they're not going to be better. So that's kind of the challenge around early planted soybeans. If they're not ahead of the later planted soybeans, the only benefit you got is you got the work done. And that's, that's kind of why I think corn is kind of a little bit of a different beast. We just don't see an advantage to earlier planting dates in corn. There's a disadvantage to late, but there's not this straight trend line like what we see in soybeans, where soybeans, it's all, this is an exaggeration, but it's almost, the earlier you go, the better. Corn's not that way. Corn's pretty flat for a long time. I would say there's not much data out there to support there's any difference in corn yield between an early April planting date and a mid-May planting date. So there's about a 4 or 5, maybe 6 week window there where corn yield's pretty flat. And then it just starts to slowly taper off. And then as you get later and later, the steepness of that taper, it tapers off more quickly. Yes, thank you, Adam. So producer Adam just reminded me that the other important thing that sometimes goes unmentioned because we're just all assuming that people are doing it, seed treatment in soybeans is vitally important in early planting. So when we talk about these ultra early planting dates for soybeans, it always assumes a good quality, fully loaded seed treatment. And if you're not using treated seed in your soybeans, I would not recommend planting soybeans much before May. If you want to make seed treatment look good, we do this in some of these planting date studies. So sometimes you maybe question, well, what kind of value am I getting out of that seed treatment? And seed treatments, the seed treatment I'm using these days costs more than the soybeans cost 20 years ago. And so it seems pretty expensive. And is it really worth it? And sometimes when you're planting beans in May, frankly, it is difficult to show the value of seed treatment in some cases. But if you want to make seed treatment look good, try planting some untreated naked seed in March and see what you get. And typically when we do that, it's a very striking difference in emergence. And I have seen plots of untreated seed from some of these March and even earlier planting dates where you literally have no seeds emerged with no seed treatment, and you end up with an 80 or 85% stand out of the same seed planted the same day, side by side in the same field, just because of seed treatment. So very important call out from Adam there that, when we're talking about early planted soybeans, we are just assuming that there's going to be seed treatment on those beans. And so if you're not a believer in using treated soybean seed, April and earlier planted beans are not for you. So probably more than you wanted to hear, but hopefully that answers your question. And if anybody else has follow-up questions, please put them in the chat. So we'll jump back into the pipeline discussion here. So I kind of went through and made a list, just to my list that I showed you earlier, just to kind of remind myself of the things I wanted to touch on. And these are in kind of rough chronological order. A couple of these products that we're going to start here on the top of the list are actually in the marketplace today, but you probably haven't planted them yet, and they're very new. So I've still got them on the list, but first on the list would be SmartStax Pro, which we've touched on before. SmartStax Pro has the new RNAi rootworm technology, which is the first non-BT rootworm control event that's been released in the marketplace. Very, very, very high level of rootworm protection. My colleagues in Northern Illinois are getting geared up to sell a lot of SmartStax Pro. And any place where we have heavy rootworm pressure, that technology is really, really going to be a benefit and really separate itself from other products in the marketplace. Another new product coming, actually just got EPA federal registration for this product in the last couple of days. New corn herbicide called Tri-Volt. So you'll be hearing more about that coming in the future months and years. Probably we'll have some a little bit of sample product out this year for people to take a look at. Was not registered in time to ramp up commercial production for a big launch, but will certainly be part of our mix for 2023 from a commercial standpoint. And basically new corn premix with a new, not a new group 15, but a group 15 that really hasn't been used much in North America. Active ingredients flufenicet. And so it's in the same class of chemistry as acetochlor, Zidua, Frontier, Dual, products that you've known for a long time. Very low use rate products. So it has the advantage of most of those group 15s. Zidua would be an exception to this, but most of those group 15s are pretty high use rate products. So basically, Tri-Volt is a mixture of essentially Corvus, which is a product we've had for many years, and flufenicet, which will be a new 3-way premix in corn that we're very excited about. Next thing I had on my list is not really a product, but you've probably heard a lot of talk about carbon and sequestering carbon in the soil, sustainability. Depending on where you're at on the political spectrum and where your beliefs are, some of this talk about carbon and sustainability might irritate and frustrate you. I get that myself, and there are a lot of folks in the world that are very concerned about the impact that our activities in agriculture are having on the climate and the planet, and how can we be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And agriculture has a big either opportunity or threat in this space, because some people feel that agriculture can be part of the solution. Some people feel that agriculture is a big part of the problem, and having a seat at the table, engaging in the dialogue, is probably going to put agriculture as an industry and farmers individually in a better place than us sticking our head in the sand and just ignoring the conversation. So if you don't have interest in cover crops on your farm, you don't have interest in no-till on your farm, you don't really have interest in sequestering carbon, you don't really understand why anybody's interested in that. I get that. But there probably are, there's a myriad of different carbon programs out there. I think that's coming, whether you believe in it or not. And it might be something that down the road, or even here today, might be an opportunity for you on your farm to generate a little extra income, and maybe help some people feel better that you're being part of the solution rather than part of the problem. Another new corn stack that you probably haven't heard of yet. This is fairly new to me as well. Something we're going to call VT4 Pro, and this is a product. There's no new traits in VT4 Pro, so it'll come to the market fairly quickly. This is a new above and below ground trait stack. So Tricepta is a product that we launched a few years ago, and Tricepta is basically our double pro trait package with AgriSure Viptera stacked into it. So it's a very, very, very strong above ground insect protection package. And we're currently in the process of converting the bulk of our above ground portfolio to Tricepta over the coming years. And what VT4 Pro is going to be is Tricepta above ground with Cry 3 BB1, which is the old Monsanto Triple Pro, rootworm trait stacked with RNAi. So it's a very unique, very high yield potential rootworm above and below ground protected product, not designed for the really, really, really heavy pressure rootworm environments, which is where SmartStax Pro needs to be, because without Herculex below ground in the mix, VT4 Pro is not going to have the level of rootworm protection. So there's 3 rootworm traits in SmartStax Pro. There's only 2 rootworm traits in VT4 Pro, and pulling out that other BT trait does impact the level of rootworm protection that we're going to get from VT4 Pro. Next on the list is a new herbicide, and when you hear the term new herbicide these days, typically that means a new name on an old herbicide, or a new mixture of old herbicides, or the same mixture with different ratios of rates of the old herbicides. So the term new and herbicide tends to kind of get overused a little bit, and people get a little bit skeptical and a little bit callous about, well, what's new and what's really not new. It's just a new way of selling something old. One of the coolest things about being part of Bayer is we are still in small molecule herbicide discovery, which is something that Monsanto had not been in for probably close to 30 years. And so there are actual new molecules being developed at Bayer, not just herbicides, but also fungicides, insecticides, other molecules as well. And something we call Bayer 478, because it doesn't have a trade name yet, is actually technology that's new to North America. We have sold that active ingredient in Europe, and we've discovered through testing that it is highly, highly, highly efficacious, which is a fancy weed science term for killing weeds, on Amaranthus species. So Amaranthus species would be your pigweeds, and what's in the pigweed family? Waterhemp and Palmer. So the 2 boogeymen of pigweeds today. This product has very, very good efficacy on those pigweeds. Can be used in both corn and soybeans, and it is selective chemistry. So selective chemistry would mean that it's only killing certain species of weeds, and you don't need a trait to protect the crop from the herbicide. So this will be new rootworm, or not new rootworm, but new Waterhemp and Palmer active chemistry, pre-emergent, so soil applied in corn and soybeans, that'll be coming in the next few years. The other thing that we've talked about a little bit here on Ask the Agronomist that's coming down in the not too distant future would be short corn, or now known as smart corn, from Bayer. And this basically is just a breeding trait that we're working with that reduces the internode length on the corn below the ear. So basically, you've got the same number of leaves, you've got the same leaf area, you've got the same sunlight interception, because it's not the stalk that's intercepting sunlight, it's the leaves. But you've got a shorter statured plant, because the internodes below the ear don't elongate as much as standard corn. So just like with normal corn, there's a range of heights. There will be a range of heights in short corn. The shortest would probably be about 6 feet tall under normal growing conditions, and tall short corn would be about 8 feet tall. So it's going to be 2 or 3 feet shorter on average than what you're used to with standard corn, which is going to give you the ability, if you so choose, to have season-long access to your field with standard ground equipment. You won't have to have a super high boy on stilts to get over the top of short corn. So, if you want to manage fungicide more aggressively, if you want to apply fungicide with ground equipment, if you want to manage nitrogen more precisely, understand not everybody does, but you're going to have the ability to. The other big advantage that we see from the smart corn system is, because the plant's shorter, because it has a girthier stalk, because it has a stronger stalk, it is much, much, much less prone to lodging and green snap. So from a defensive standpoint, there are some huge benefits in reducing the potential for lodging and green snap. The TAs, the technical agronomists like myself, we're each going to have a couple field trial locations this year where we're looking at some 10 and 20 acre field trials with smart corn. We plan to have a groundbreakers type launch, limited launch in 23, and then a full scale commercial launch in 24. So smart corn's not too far away from the marketplace. Go back on herbicides. So you've probably heard us mention HT4 before. So HT4 is really the next big thing coming, not just from Bayer, but industry wide from what we can see in soybean trait technology. So HT4 will be a 5-way herbicide stack. Now there's not anything brand new in HT5, but in HT4. We'll talk about HT5 in a minute. There is something brand new in that. So HT4 is just stacking the 5 current herbicide technologies that are in soybeans today, which would be glyphosate or Roundup, glufosinate or Liberty, dicamba, 2,4-D, and HPPD resistance together in one plant. So what to me is exciting about HT4 is that we can get back to what I would call the good old days, where one soybean would allow you to use whatever herbicide program you desire, and whatever herbicide program your neighbor is using will not hurt your beans. So that sounds like a better place to be than where we've been here the last few years. HT4 is not as close as I would like it to be. I'd love to say it's coming next year or the year after that, but we're talking 26, 27 is what we're hearing. There's some regulatory approvals that have to happen. And if you've been around Monsanto very long, you know how it's easy to stub your toe when you start getting really bold about when something's going to get approved, because that's not really up to us. So hopefully things come together, and hopefully we can get that technology in the marketplace sooner rather than later. But there are some new traits involved in that mix that are going to require regulatory and export approvals. So working our way down the list here. So we talked about SmartStax Pro, which used to be called corn rootworm 3 in breeding, and there's already something called corn rootworm 4, which is coming behind SmartStax Pro. So we know that rootworm, since about 1960, have demonstrated the ability time and time again to overcome whatever control measure we use against them. They overcame organophosphate insecticides. They overcame crop rotation. They are in the process of overcoming BT traits. They're a very, very, very adaptable pest. And we know that we're going to have to continue to develop new ways to control rootworm. So, coming after, SmartStax Pro, we're already working on, what's going to replace that product down the road. New fungicide molecules. I think you would probably guess that with the introduction of tar spot and with the disease issues that we saw in corn last year, I think fungicide use is going to increase. I think there's going to be more people using fungicide. There's going to be more people using fungicide multiple times in the same field in the same year, and possibly using the same product multiple times in the same field in the same year, which is going to drive what? Most likely resistance. And, we're going to have new fungicide molecules to make sure that we can manage that down the road. So I'll mention too, I should have called this out when we were talking about smart corn, but there's a couple different ways, actually 3 different ways we've developed to shorten corn. So the product that we're going to be working with this summer in my field trials, and we will be launching in the next year or two, is a breeding event. So it's a native trait that reduces the internode length below the ear. So the disadvantage of that trait, the advantage of that trait is you don't need a regulatory approval. It's not biotech. There's no approval process to go through, and it's going to be easier to get that product in the marketplace. The disadvantage of it is it's only shortening the internodes below the ear. So what that means is you end up with a plant that is, you have to be really careful with the ear height as you're developing hybrids, because all of the shortening is happening below the ear. We have a biotech trait in development that actually shortens every internode on the plant by a percentage. And so the shortening is occurring both above and below the ear. And so what you get is a overall shorter plant, but with a higher ear. Now, it's not a high ear, but it's higher than what, the first short corn product that we're going to have out. Our product concept on smart corn is a minimum ear height of 24 inches. So we are, paying attention to that. We do recognize that if you get the ear too low, it becomes it creates a harvest issue, especially on the ground like I farm that is not level in many cases. And so there probably are some acres out there, the more rolling acres, lighter ground, more variable soils that may not be suitable for smart corn. And we don't anticipate, ever not selling standard corn. So the other thing that, if you're working for one of our seed brands, you might be a little bit nervous about all this innovation coming, because we've talked about all these new corn traits. We've talked about short corn. We're going to be selling standard and smart corn at the same time. Are you going to have all these trait options available in both platforms? We're going to be integrating a lot of new traits into the marketplace, and that creates an explosion of what we refer to as SKUs, which SKUs are just different products. And so, every time you put a different seed treatment on a hybrid, that creates a new SKU. Every time you have a different grade size, creates a new SKU. Every time you have a different trait package, creates a new SKU. All those have to be produced. All those have to be manufactured. All those have to be inventoried and managed. And SKU proliferation is something that seed corn companies especially worry about a lot, because it creates a nightmare from inventory management. So there are things that are going to be challenges. They're going to have to be managed with all these different options. It's great to have options, but with options comes complexity and things that have to be managed. That's not something that, you as a customer necessarily need to be worried about. That's up to us to figure that out. But if we give you 1,000 different options to choose from, that's a lot harder business to manage than if we give you 10 options to choose from. So HT5 is on the heels of HT4, and HT5 will be a 6-way herbicide stack in soybeans. And there are 2 brand new things that are not on the marketplace today that are part of HT5. And I should back up. If you're good with math, you may have noticed that. Well, why do you call it HT4 if there's 5 traits in it? And why do you call it HT5 if there's 6 traits in it? Fair question. The HT stands for herbicide technology, and the number refers to the generation. So you could say Roundup Ready 1 was HT1. You could say Roundup Ready 2 was HT2. We didn't really ever call them that, but it would be historically accurate to say that. Extend would have been the 3rd generation. So as we're going through these different generations of herbicide technologies, they've each got a number. So the 4th generation is HT4, 5th generation is HT5. And so what HT5 is going to add into the mix is a new PPO product. So it's a new non-selective herbicide. So non-selective means that it kills lots of stuff, including the crop. So a non-selective herbicide, which, glufosinate or Liberty is a non-selective herbicide. Glyphosate or Roundup is a non-selective herbicide. You have to have a trait to make the crop resistant to the non-selective herbicide so that it's not controlling the crop as well. So this new PPO chemistry, so this would be different than PPO. There's a lot of PPO chemistry on the market today. Those are all selective products, meaning that they control species of weeds. Some of them, a lot of different species of weeds, primarily broadleaf weeds. So we don't really have a PPO today that kills grass. But this PPO chemistry will kill grass and broadleaf weeds. It will also kill corn and soybeans if you don't make them resistant to it. So HT5 will have a new herbicide that has to be registered. No easy feat there. That will have activity on, and so far we're seeing in our preliminary trials, we have activity on PPO resistant water hemp with this new PPO chemistry. Hopefully when it's available, perhaps as early as later this decade, we still have activity on water hemp with this new PPO chemistry. Water hemp's a tricky beast. Water hemp has developed resistance to herbicides that it's never even been sprayed with yet. So metabolic weed resistance is an area where there's a lot of research going on, and it's scary because we used to think that the only way a weed would become resistant to herbicide was repeated use of that herbicide. And a lot of people probably still perceive that to be the case. But water hemp has been documented, by academics and other weed scientists to have developed resistance to products that have never even been used to control it. So you don't necessarily have to develop resistance through selection. That's kind of the traditional way that it has happened. But water hemp is a tricky enough beast that it has lots of different ways that it can develop resistance to herbicide. So that's why we want to have as many tools in the toolbox to control water hemp as possible, because we know that those tools are going to break over time, and you want to have a spare. So that's the way we're going to try to manage water hemp long term. So the HT5 be a very exciting technology. The thing I love about HT5, so if you think about today's residual PPO chemistry, so think about your best water hemp pre-emergent products to use in soybeans. Probably things like Valor, things like Authority. What's the limitation of those products today? Very good on water hemp, a little bit hard on soybeans. And you cannot, under any circumstances, spray them post, or you'll smoke your beans. So those products have to go on early. They have to go on before soybeans come up. It kind of limits your application window. And, if you want to plant soybeans, back to our original question, if you're going to plant soybeans in early April or even earlier in some cases, that means you have to get those herbicides on before the beans come up. That means you're probably going to be applying those products in April. And water hemp specifically is a relatively warm soil weed. So water hemp is not an issue in March and April and until about the middle of May. You're not going to see a lot of water hemp emerging. And if you're putting your residual water hemp product out there April 1st, it's going to lay there in the soil for over a month before water hemp even starts to germinate. So all it's doing is decomposing and breaking down. It's not really giving you a benefit, but you have to put it on early because you got to get it on before the beans come up. How could we manage water hemp better from a weed science standpoint if we had a technology that would enable you to spray some of the best chemistry for pre-emergent water hemp control, but you could wait to put them on until closer to when the weed's going to be germinating, and you could spray them, say early post rather than pre. So opens up a lot of management opportunities and I think better way to manage water hemp. So other things that are, and this is not something that is necessarily one specific product, but I just kind of term it digital transformation. We got into the digital space many years ago as Monsanto when we purchased Climate, and through Climate Field View, we are continuing to develop digital tools, and that digital space has been kind of that's where a lot of investment has occurred, not just from Monsanto, not just from Bayer, but from other companies, even non-ag companies have gotten into that digital space in agriculture. So that's kind of considered to be somewhat of a new frontier. And depending on, maybe your age and your interest in technology, you may have different feelings about that digital space. I'm not the most tech savvy guy in the world, so I struggle with some of that stuff. I'll be honest. We've tried to make those tools easy to use in Field View, and I think they are relatively easy to use, but it's not as easy as when you didn't have them. That was simpler. But the things that you can do with digital are pretty cool, and we are going to continue to develop more tools. So one we're working on today is a product called Seed Advisor, which is utilizing the information that we've been able to glean from looking at the performance of hybrids across acres, that will try to recommend a hybrid by field approach. So it's going to look at the environment, look at the field, look at the soils, look at the yield history, look at your management practices, and try to, in the background, it's running a whole bunch of algorithms based on, all the data that we've collected, and going to predict, what we feel the best bear hybrid would be for that field, and what the management practices should be to go along with that. That might be a variable rate seeding. That might be a population recommendation. It could be, how do you manage fungicide? How do you manage nitrogen? What goes along with that hybrid? But tools like that are in development. Another thing that I'm very excited about personally, that isn't enabled by this digital transformation, is a concept we call outcome-based pricing. And some of you may have been involved in some pilots we worked on over the past few years, where we looked at what we called OBP in corn. And if you think about it, when you buy a product, what are you paying for? Are you paying, when you buy corn seed, let's say, did you really want corn seed? You probably wanted yield, you wanted standability, you wanted harvestability. When you buy a herbicide, let's say, did you really want the herbicide? No, you wanted a clean field, right? So you're buying weed control. When you buy seed, you're buying yield. You're buying harvestability. When you buy, a fungicide, you didn't really want the fungicide. You wanted disease protection, and that relates back to yield. So really, what you want is you don't want the product, you want the outcome. And the outcome varies, right? Based on disease pressure, based on the environment. You don't know what the outcome is going to be when you buy something. You know what you paid for it. You know the outcome you need to break even on that product. But what happens if you don't get the outcome? Well, you're just SOL. The way products have always been sold. We've sold products by the acre, or by the gallon, or by the ton, or by the pound, or by the whatever. We haven't sold products based on what value did you get from them, because that's tied to the outcome. So if we know the outcome through yield monitoring, yield mapping, digital data collection, it's not that much of a stretch to think that we could price the product based on the outcome, not based on the product. And that's really what the concept of OBP is. Now that makes some people uncomfortable because it's different. It makes some of our retail partners uncomfortable and our seed dealers uncomfortable, because it might change the way they market our products. But I think from a grower perspective, the fairest way to value a product is what did it give you? And so the thing that we have to get comfortable with as an industry, if this is going to go, you have to get comfortable with paying more for products when they deliver more value to you on your farm. Now, the trade-off on that is you're going to pay less for products when they deliver you less value on your farm. The way it is today, the value of the product doesn't change whether it worked or not. And you're paying the same price for the product, whether you got the value that we expected you to get out of it or not. So I think an outcome-based pricing approach, I think, is the most fair way to value products. But we have to get comfortable with the fact that the value of the product is going to change based on how well or how poorly it ended up performing on your farm. And we're going to try to minimize the incidences of poor performance on your farm by, smarter positioning and smarter recommendations and better products and, all those things. But we still know that surprises happen. One thing we've learned the hard way in some cases, going through this digital transformation is we're really good at predicting the future if the future's like the past. The problem with the future is it's not like the past, and you don't necessarily know what the future is going to be. So when we make a recommendation to you based on everything we know about a hybrid and everything we know about your field and everything we know about the typical environment in, say, McDonough County, Illinois, which is where we happen to be sitting here this morning, and then that environment changes with some new variables. Maybe we get 3x normal rainfall in June. Maybe we have a record windstorm in July. Maybe we have absolutely no rain in July. Maybe we have a new disease show up like tar spot. Maybe we have the perfect spring conditions like we did last year for crown rot to be a big factor. Those are all things that it would be nearly impossible to anticipate. And you cannot anticipate every possible thing that might go wrong in a field. And so no matter how smart you are, no matter how good your products are, no matter how much yield data you've got, no matter how much field history you've got, no matter how well I know my products, there's still things that happen that we didn't anticipate. And when those things happen, it kind of throws a little bit of a monkey wrench into some of these approaches. And I don't think we're ever going to be able to change that. We're just going to have to get comfortable with managing through those sort of things. So obviously biologicals is a huge, huge frontier. That's kind of the wild, wild west. If you want to, if you're a small company and you don't have $2 billion a year to invest in R&D like Bayer does, and you want to develop products, that biological space is an area where there's a lot of work going on. The big companies are involved in biologicals, but there's a lot of small players involved in biologicals as well. We don't know who's going to come up with the next blockbuster biological product that's going to be, the thing that everybody's got to have. I had a good question from a customer a couple months ago, and he actually suggested this as a topic for Ask the Agronomist. And I kind of teased him a little bit about, he wanted me to open up a can of worms that I didn't really want to open up. And his question was, as a farmer, how do you know which biological products are good, and how do you know which biological products you ought to use? And I said, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole, but I recognize that there's more things out there than any individual farmer could ever try. Every product on the market today has claims that are made by the people that are selling it of what it can do for you. Some of those claims I believe, a lot of those claims I don't believe. I would say it's somewhat the history of every manufacturer of every product is that we all could at times be accused of exaggerating the benefits of our products. And so as a consumer, how's that saying go? Let the buyer beware. You do have to be careful, whose data you believe and whose data you don't believe. You cannot test every product on the market on your own farm. And even if you do, we've talked about this before too. You could do a side-by-side on your farm. You can't get more real for you than a side-by-side on your farm. But what's the limitations of a side-by-side on your farm? It's one time, 1 year, one field, one hybrid, and that does not tell the whole story on any product. So if you try a side-by-side on your farm of a product and it gives you a 15 bushel yield increase and you only paid $5 an acre for that product, it's like, wow. That's a huge ROI. I'm doing that on every acre forever. The flip side, if you try a product that you spent $20 an acre on and you got a half a bushel yield increase in corn, you're like, well, those guys are lying to me. That thing didn't do squat. I'm never doing that again. And either of those outcomes or assessments could be absolutely wrong because you might have seen the outcome that happens 5% of the time. And if you base your decision on a product based on the outcome that happens 5% of the time, you're making the wrong decision. So that's the limitation of trying things yourself. You just can't try it yourself 1,000 times. And a lot of these products, they ought to be tested 1,000 times to see, do we get a benefit 5% of the time? Do we get a benefit 95% of the time? What is the average benefit? What is the range in benefits? So, fungicides, for example, I've seen side-by-sides where fungicides do nothing. I've seen side-by-sides where fungicides give you an extra 50 bushel of yield in corn. Neither one of those outcomes is real. And I don't mean they're not real from they didn't happen. I mean, they're not real in the sense that that's not the average. That's not what's typical. That's not what you should expect. But it is sometimes what happens. And that's kind of the challenge of evaluating things in the field.
Hey, we got
Yes.
about 10 minutes left.
Okay.
And John Green.
Thank you, John.
In a question. So Thank you, John. Appreciate it. John's got a good question. You're talking earlier about
John always has good questions.
Short corn / smart corn.
Yes.
And he says, in quotes, in general, will short corn require a higher population, or do you know yet?
Okay. So great question, John. I would say it depends a little bit on what your goals are in breeding. So the reason I say that is the products that I'm going to use for my trials this summer were a population of hybrids that we started with in breeding when our concept for short corn was narrow rows, high seeding rates, high management. So the hybrids that I'm going to be playing with this summer, which are not commercial hybrids, they're not hybrids that we're going to release. I would say they do require higher seeding rates to be competitive with standard corn. And I would say it's probably easier to breed short corn that requires high seeding rates to be competitive with standard corn. Our product concept for our 2024 commercial launch is that we're going to bring you a product that is shorter with improved standability and improved in-season field access that does not require narrow rows or a significant increase in your seeding rate to deliver the same yield that you're used to getting. Now, I will say that short corn or smart corn will be far more adaptable to narrow rows and far more adaptable to higher seeding rates than standard corn is. And I will also say that if you ask your dad what population he was planting when he started farming, or you ask your grandpa what population he planted when he started farming, or if you are the dad or the grandpa, you might remember what your population was when you started farming. We have been narrowing row spacing in corn since the days of horses, and we have been increasing the seeding rate in corn since the days of horses. And I don't think either one of those trends is done yet. So I think there'll always be guys raising corn in 30-inch rows, just like there's still people raising corn in 38-inch rows today. But the average row spacing in corn continues to narrow. The average seeding rate in corn continues to increase. If you look at, the average planting populations of the guys that win, NCGA yield contests, it's far, far, far higher than what the standard seeding rates is normally. So I guess I'm kind of taking too long to answer your question, John, but basically we're going to try to develop smart corn to not require you to increase your seeding rates, but we also believe that the average grower is not planting thick enough today. And one of the main reasons is because you're worried about root lodging, you're worried about stalk lodging, you're worried about green snap, you're worried about standability, you're worried about harvestability. And if we could remove those fears, I think a lot of farmers would be willing to plant thicker. And I think we could get higher yields out of corn today if we planted it thicker. There's just too much risk for most people to increase that seeding rate. So I do think smart corn will drive seeding rates higher, but that's not necessarily because you have to plant it thicker to get it to yield. I think you'll want to plant it thicker to get more yield, and you'll just feel more comfortable in doing it. So good question, John, and more to come on that. And I would say that we have done enough work with short corn to know that it does tend to be more responsive to higher seeding rates than standard corn is. And I would also say that based on our research, standard corn is more responsive to higher seeding rates than most people would believe as well. It's just that fear factor of, oh gosh, if I plant it too thick, it's going to go down. One other thing I'll throw out that you might want to noodle on a little bit. If you get to an outcome-based pricing approach, seeding rate may not have the impact on seed cost that you kind of think of it having today. If you're paying for the outcome rather than the bag of corn, the planting population that you use is a little bit less of a factor in what are your costs than it is today. So that'd be something to think about as well.
Hey everybody, we got about 5 minutes left. Some great questions, great conversation around smart corn. I think smart corn is going to be a really, really fun and interesting product that gets introduced. I think we got a lot to learn there, but I think there's also a lot of potential. So some great questions. If you got any pre-plant questions for Lance, try to get them into us. We've got just a few minutes left to try and address any pre-planting questions. And
I will, while we're waiting on maybe one more good question to come in, I will touch on the last thing on my list. And so we didn't really talk at all about breeding or genetics through that entire list. And it's the last thing on my list, but it's, I would say, the most important thing on the list. And I've always been proud of the fact that whether it was Monsanto or today at Bayer, we're known for spending a lot of money in R&D on trait development. But unbeknownst to a lot of our customers, we've always spent way more money on germplasm development than we have on trait development. So I think we've always recognized, and this is something I've always said, a good trait in crappy germplasm, you can't make crappy germplasm good with a trait. All you end up with is expensive, mediocre products. You got to have that good germplasm to deliver the traits to the field and give you the success that you're looking for. So the advancements that we've made in breeding over the last 20 years and the advancements that we will continue to make in breeding, just I can't do them justice. I mean, when I hear some of our leadership from breeding talk about the things we can do as a breeding group today that we couldn't do 10 years ago or 20 years ago, it kind of blows my mind. It's just the precision breeding technology, the ways we can develop products faster and better, the ways we can achieve more genetic gain versus what we used to do 10 or 20 years ago are really cool. And that stuff is going to continue in the background. And that's the technology that will enable us to continue to develop elite germplasm. That's the technology that's going to enable us to make something that someday is probably resistant to tar spot. That's the way we're going to solve lots of big problems and continue to drive yield gains even more than all these new traits and all these new technologies that we like to talk about. So with that, we're coming up on the end of time here. Any last questions come in, Adam?
No
Okay.
last minute questions. Again, 2 weeks from today, which would be the 24th.
Hey, that's my birthday.
Oh, all right.
So
we'll have Lance's birthday celebration episode.
That's all right. That's cool. I like that. We'll
bring some wild hats in.
You can all get another year older with Lance. So February 24th, we'll be back for Ask the Agronomist, and that sounds like a party. So everybody, thanks again. I love the interaction, love the questions, appreciate it. If you did not get your question asked here live today, send it to your FSR, send it to your dealer, send it to me. I don't have the whiteboard behind us here, and Nutrient doesn't want me writing my email address on their wall, so I don't have my email address to share. But a lot of you probably got it. You know how to get a hold of me.
We'll put it in the chat.
There we go. We can put it in the chat. But get your questions to me. And so some of the best episodes we've had, I think, had nothing to do with me. They were because someone sent me a question via email or some other means and asked a good question. And I've had I rely on you to provide the content for Ask the Agronomist. I don't really do anything here other than answer your questions. So the best content for Ask the Agronomist is you sending in your questions. So please do that any way you can. And with that, I will wish you all well. Got a phone call coming in here on Ask the Agronomist Live this morning. So, so anyway, appreciate Nutrient allowing us to use their conference room. And thanks to all you for joining and all your questions. And we'll be back with you in 2 weeks. So everybody be safe, be well.